Good afternoon. I'm Anne-Marie O'Connor, the chair of the Redington Frognal Association, preserving architecture, community, and the environment in a historically significant London district. Thank you all so much for coming to our exhibit on the restoration of the Branch Hill Pond. And thank you to the JW3 Center for graciously hosting us here. Today, artist Estelle Lovatt will tell us the story of John Constable, the English landscape painter who immortalized this Hampstead pond. At a time of global warming, shrinking biodiversity, and vanishing ponds, we view the restoration of this wildlife pond as a step in the right direction for changing our relationship to nature. I hope everyone has had a chance to view the work of Dr. Adam Broadhead of Arup, who Red Frog commissioned to map previously unidentified rivers in the Red Frog area. His research provided evidence of the routes and directions of many of the historic rivers and tributaries. Robin Lacey did his own on-the-ground research and drew the former waterways onto a modern street map. Geologist Diana Clements and artist Dee McLean were co-creators of the exhibit on display here. Working with Robin, they provided the text and artwork to bring this all to life. We are deeply grateful to them. We're also thankful to the organizations that funded the project, notably the Mayor of London, Camden Council, the City of London Corporation, and the City Bridge Trust. Thank all of you for participating here today. I hope you'll take time to complete the questionnaire and leave your email addresses. And I also invite you to join the Red Frog Association. Now I'm very honored to introduce the highly accomplished Estelle Lovatt, art critic, writer, lecturer, and television commentator on art. Estelle will tell us about plein air painter John Constable and his historic connection to the Branch Hill Pond. Thank you, Estelle. It's a pleasure to welcome you.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here. I must say that I feel like I've sort of gone home. I've been writing about artists in Hampstead and doing my Walk Constable's Hampstead event intermittently on and off since writing for it for the Hampstead Advertiser newspaper. Anybody remember that? Did that back in 1990. And as a little child, my mother took me to the Camden Arts Centre, just over the road, which is a magnificent place. And I was lucky enough, after I left art school, or actually while I was still at art school, to get my first teaching and lecturing job there, working for Jeanette Jackson, the name probably some of you will remember, and David Carr. I'm working for them at the Camden Arts Centre as they ran it, and also the Camden Artists Council, who put up the art shows at the Royal Free Hospital, where I helped with that too, as the secretary for a period, and also taught the Royal Free Hospital staff life drawing. So I feel as though I've sort of come full circle, and it makes me feel all warm and fuzzy to actually be here today with you and to share that thought with you. So thank you very much for coming. So the reason we're here is to talk about John Constable and the fact that he painted Branch Hill Pond, which is going to be reinstated. The thing about John Constable, which a lot of people don't realise, is that not only did he paint landscapes, but actually, I like to say that his landscapes are also self-portraits, and I will explain more of that as we go along. I'm not going to take up too much of your time today. I'm not going to talk for very long. If you have questions as I'm speaking, or even a question as I'm speaking, either about what I'm saying or something that I'm not saying that you're interested in, either about Hampstead or Constable, or about an image that I'm showing you, can you please put your hand up and ask me as we go along? Otherwise, you might forget, or you might fall asleep. Anyway, so Constable, an English romantic. What does it mean to be an English romantic during his lifetime? He was born in 1776 and he died in 1837 at the age of 60, which is when he was living at Hampstead. Think about Wordsworth, I wandered lonely as a cloud, and Keats' Ode to a Nightingale. English romanticism at that time was an art form which was very subjective. It was a personal vision with a sentiment for a specific space, inspired by nature. Constable loved Hampstead. He referred to it as Dear Hampstead. Every day in Hampstead, he said, makes me long for a walk. As long as I'm able to hold a brush, I shall never cease to paint. Why is that, and how did he end up there? Hampstead, we know, is 400 feet higher than the City of London, the lungs of London. People used to go there from the city because Hampstead at that time, during this Georgian and Regency period of Constable, it wasn't part of London. It was a little village outside of London. And it was a spa. People used to go there for the fresh air, for the exercise, for the views, for the water. In fact, what's really interesting is that people used to go to the ponds for the water and they'd have the laundresses take their dirty washing and wash it in the ponds because they said it was some of the softest water around. So it was almost like using comfort softener today. And also we know that the other water around had a lot of iron, so it was good for anemia. So it was almost like you could pretend you were drinking Guinness without getting drunk. Also, we know that Hampstead was full of sand pits and gravel pits because the sand was taken to build up central London. So Hampstead was not a village like we know it today. Hampstead, if I like to say that it's almost like Hampstead on the beach. It was a refuge from the crowded and polluted city. It was a moor. It was a farming area. There were men at work on this farming area, tending the farm animals. So your neighbours wouldn't have been Mr. and Mrs. Jones. Your neighbours would have been a horse, a sheep, a cow, and a donkey. And we know that Constable painted those as well. Branch Hill Pond was filled in about 1890, but Constable said that from Branch Hill Pond, in the distance, he could see the views of Child's Hill, the fields in Hendon, church spires in Harrow on the Hill, and on a very clear day, Windsor Castle. Now, Windsor Castle is evident on some of his paintings of Branch Hill Pond, underneath a cloud. Why are clouds so important to Constable? Well, he was born, as you know, in East Burgh in Suffolk, born into a wealthy corn merchant family, corn millers, and his father wanted John to take over the family business as a mill hand. John had other ideas. Sorry.
I was just going to say, would we be able to see better if the main lights were switched on?
Yes, that would be great if somebody is able to turn off the lights. I'll put this first image back on then, and we can see it. While they're just adjusting the lights, I'll tell you a little bit. then about the relationship with his father. So his father wanted him to take over the family business. And John had other ideas. John wanted to be an artist. He was also a religious young man, and he was, thank you very much. That's better, isn't it? Thank you very much. Good suggestion. Thank you. He wanted to be a painter, but also, as a religious man, was considering joining the Church of England to teach the gospel. So he was in a bit of a dilemma. Should he paint or should he preach? He said that he had a moral duty to paint God's landscape. Now we know that he rented his first property in Hampstead in 1819, but as you can see from this one, a church in the trees, this was painted in Hampstead in 1800. So well before Constable moved to Hampstead, he was walking, as a student at the Royal Academy schools, he was walking from central London, the 3 miles each way, there and back, up to Hampstead, because it reminded him of growing up in a carefree childhood in Suffolk. I just want to tell you something which I find rather amusing. As he was sort of battling with himself as to whether he should paint churches or whether he should paint the landscape, because the church was so important to him, as his paintings developed, the churches got bigger and bigger and bigger, which caused a problem because they're not topographically correct, which meant that anybody that used his paintings as a way to gauge how far away they were from the church, because we didn't have Google Maps then, would have a problem, because he'd paint the church huge because he believed that paying homage to God and God's creation was the right thing to do. But anybody looking at it would say, okay, well, we're sort of in this vantage point, so many feet away from that tree. That church isn't that far. And of course, it would be miles further away, but Constable just decided to paint it bigger and bigger. Anyway, Constable said, I love trees and I love water, but I don't like grass painted brown, looking like tar, grease, or a fiddle, a violin, because grass is green. Constable is probably the only artist to have used 1,000 different greens. And whilst he's going from his studio as a student at the Royal Academy in 1800, whilst he's going up to Hampstead, he's going with his paint box. And at that time, the paint box would consist of his paint, oil paint in pig's bladders, because it was before the invention of the tubes. Not the trains, the metal, well, both, but the metal tubes of paint. And also he'd paint with watercolours, which were kept in little porcelain little dishes. But he'd go up and he'd sit just by Judge's Walk. That was his most favourite part. And he'd paint these images of Hampstead. And he'd often risk his life. Never mind the highwaymen and the highway robbers that were there, but he used to love working with emerald green, and emerald green was poisonous at the time because it had to be mixed with arsenic. Here's another one. Again, before he actually moved to Hampstead, this is while he's walking up to Hampstead. This is Hampstead Stormy Sky in 1814. And what's interesting about this one is how you can see there's a definite inspiration from the Italian Renaissance artists, from the Flemish and the French Baroque artists, but he's really interested in the scientific advancement of meteorology, and that he learnt from his father. Whilst he was working for his father for 7 years, hating every solid minute of it, every second of it, what he learnt is he learnt about the clouds and he learnt about the weather conditions because as a mill hand, he would have to know what direction the wind was going in and whether or not the sails on the barges and the windmills would have to be changed in order to best get the most efficient results for the corn business. And that's what he included in his paintings. It's another one of Branch Hill Pond, Hampstead Heath with the cart and carters. So you can see the pond there. It's also quite abstract. Nowadays we would say, oh, isn't Constable expressionistic? Isn't he expressionistic? Isn't he abstract? And of course, back then, none of that language was applicable. But with him, he didn't just want you to look at the paintings, he wanted you to feel the paintings. He wanted you to feel the brush of fresh air and the wind blowing against your cheek. And the skies become ever more important to him. And he said, my art is found under every hedge in every lane, therefore no one thinks it's worth picking. I'm painting nature in harmony with humanity, the traditional English countryside. Now bear in mind, the Industrial Revolution had happened 1750s onwards. Constable chose not to paint any of the effects caused by the Industrial Revolution because there were problems. The working class people who were cultivating the land were losing their jobs to machine power, and the steamboats that were taking produce were polluting the rivers and the canals. This led to riots, to farm areas being burnt, and machinery being smashed. None of that you see in Constable's paintings. So if Constable was alive today, I'm sure he would have been an ambassador supporting Greta Thunberg and her rural conservation. Also, bear in mind that 1803 to 1815, we had the Napoleonic Wars and the Battle of Trafalgar, and we had soldiers returning from the war, unable to find work because of economic depression and social unrest, a bit like today. And I'm sure if Constable was alive today, he would also have voted Brexit. Why? Because he was a proud Englishman. And I'll tell you more about that shortly. Anyway, you can see in his paintings of Branch Hill Pond that there are animals around the pond. There's horses, there's people. He also painted cows and sheep around the pond and dogs. Did he witness all these things? Well, he used to carry a sketchbook with him everywhere, even a very teeny one, 3 by 4 inches. And when he used to go back home to visit his family in Suffolk, he would create the views, so around Widdy Lott's cottage. One of the most famous paintings, of course, is the Hay Wain. Where was the Hay Wain painted? The Hay Wain was started and finished in his art studio, not in Suffolk, but in the backyard shed at Lower Terrace. And he said, I've cleared a small shed in the garden at Lower Terrace, which held sand, coal, mops and brooms, and that is literally a coal hole. And I've made it a workshop and a place of refuge. So not many people know that the Hay Wain was painted in Hampstead as well. How did he do that, and why did he do that? Well, he had married his childhood friend, Maria Bicknell, in 1816, and she was very ill. And it was in 1819 that they first rented a property in Hampstead. He lived in about 6 different locations in Hampstead. They haven't all got the circular blue notification outside, but I know where they are. So if you want to know, then I'll tell you. But also when he was in 1819, apart from renting the first home in Hampstead, because of the spa quality of the area, because as I say, his wife was so ill, it was also the time that he sold his first painting and he became an associate of the Royal Academy. He was 43 years old. That was very old. When Constable was going through the Royal Academy, he was 10 years later than Turner. Turner went through when he was 14. He went to the Royal Academy School. And Constable was 24. So he was always slow catching up. Hence is their relationship, which I can talk about as well if you want. Anyway, the Royal Academy weren't too fond of Constable's landscapes. And Sir Thomas Lawrence, the president of the Royal Academy, referred to them as nasty green things, which Constable didn't take very kindly to. So thinking what he should do, because also he called everything landscape, 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 landscape. Even the Haywain was called Landscape Noon. And then somebody else called it the Haywain. Anyway, after being told that he paints nasty green things, he decided to paint huge 6-footer paintings, one of which is the Haywain, which he painted, as I say, in Lower Terrace. They aren't 6 foot, it's just that they're very big. The Haywain, as you know from seeing it in the National Gallery, isn't 6 foot, but it's big. So, and the 6-footer series, as they're known, is what he thought would get him public acclaim. But instead of people saying they're nasty green things, they now became nasty big green things. So he couldn't win. Now, some people say that the Haywain horse and cart was not only painted and informed by sketches that he did in Suffolk around Willicott's Lottage, but also was possibly a horse and cart that had stopped in Whitestone Pond to have a drink, to get refreshed. The clouds, we know, were painted on Hampstead Heath. Those are Hampstead Heath clouds. So the Haywain is not of Suffolk, it's actually of Hampstead. And the use of the sky, Constable said, that's what I'm going to call skying. So he invented that word. Nobody liked the Haywain, unfortunately. It didn't sell when it was painted and exhibited. 1821, he painted it in 5 months and he exhibited it at the Royal Academy. Nobody wanted it, nobody liked it, nobody bought it. Took it back to his studio with all his other paintings that he didn't sell. He probably sold no more than 20 paintings in England. However, it went to France, to the Paris Salon, and it won a gold medal. And then the following year, he won a second gold medal when he exhibited some of his work in Lille in France. And he won the 2 gold medals for his sense of realism, for the dew on the ground, for the broken colour and the flickering light. In fact, everything that the English didn't like about his work, the French adored. And his French art dealer said, look, come on, John, you're not selling anything very well there. Come and get your gold medals, do a little bit of PR, put yourself about, and you'll be laughing all the way to the bank. Constable said, I'd rather be poor in England than rich abroad in France. Again, that's because, yes, sorry.
Sorry, to interrupt your flow, but in the painting that you put up, right in the background, there's a bit of raised area on the right. Would you happen to know, is that where St Mary's Tower on the hill is?
Ah, it could be. Yeah, because as I say, he said he could see the church spires yeah.
Because that's what, in some of the paintings that I've thought of, I just wanted to see whether you agreed with me.
Yes, could possibly be. As I say, don't forget, what I like to call picture making and artistic license, he would have shifted and pulled things nearer and further away and painted things in that weren't necessarily there or that he could see, just for the sake of making the composition work, and also for the symbolism that would have been relevant. Anyway, so painting from Branch Hill Pond, he's living in Hampstead. He won't go to France, very upset because of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Trafalgar. And his wife is not very well, as you know. His wife, she died in 1828. She was only 41. She'd just given birth to their 7th child. Living in Well Walk. Constable, though, was a family man. He used to like to make time for his family, like to eat meals together. One of his favourite meals was venison. But although he had help, he had a nanny who had been with him for in the family for over 30, 35 years. He was exhausted and he had little time for painting. He was a traditionalist, very patriotic, as I told you. But after his wife died, he was in a permanent state of mourning. He always wore black. He came across as very short-tempered, very glum, very sarcastic, very rude. And that, as you can imagine, didn't help him sell his pictures either. I think the RA must have felt quite sorry for him, because the year after his wife died, they made him a full Royal Academician, but he only won by 1 vote. And Sir Thomas Lawrence said, Constable is lucky to have been elected at all. And the critics said, "Oi, what's up with Constable? It looks like there's snow in his paintings." And Constable said, "What you're referring to as my Constable's snow is the white highlights of paint where I'm trying to show the effects of light." And Constable added, "Highly educated people know very little about art." What he did know is he knew about the weather. As I told you, he learnt that from his father, because his father was interested in scientific meteorology effects of nature as well, to assist with the corn mill business that they had. But Constable knew about the hundreds of different clumps of clouds that he was invited to lecture on his landscapes when he became a Royal Academician, and the clouds. And he was invited to the Hampstead Local Assembly Rooms, which was, in Constable's time, in the portraitist George Romney's old house. George Romney had passed away by then, and his house, so by the Hollybush pub, became the local assembly rooms. And Constable was so... he could have been a weatherman today or a weather reporter. He was so splendid at knowing all the different clouds. You know, me, myself, I look outside, it's a grey day, it's a sunny day, that's it. But he knew every single cloud. And on the back of some of his paintings, he would record notes about the date, the time, the weather, the conditions of the wind and the sun and the atmosphere. For example, Hampstead, September the 11th, 1821, 10 to 11, morning under the sun, clouds silvery grey on warm ground sultry, light wind to the southwest, final day, but rain in the night following. So you'd think, actually, let me just come back to this one. You'll notice that there aren't many people, or they're devoid of people in his paintings. The reason being is because I really do strongly believe that the landscape is his self-portrait. But he did put a few people in, and we can see what looks like a pond there behind this gentleman. with either horses or cows, and a little figure there on the right, or maybe a dog or whatever it is. We don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter, because it's not the real world, it's the art world. And the art world lives totally independently than the real world. Which is probably why he had no real followers, because he was so ahead of his time. The Critic said that Constable's work is exaggerated. Look at that. It's theatrical, it's unnatural, and it's challenging. And Constable said, "My art flatters nobody by imitation. It courts nobody by smoothness, nobody by petiteliness, without either fal-de-dal, fal-de-lal, or fiddle-dee-dee. How then can I hope to be popular?" Hope you all understood that. I need to translate it. But look, how wonderful. This is a sketch at Hampstead. How adventurous was he to paint sketches looking totally different to what some people say are too chocolate boxy. You know, his finished paintings, and they're not chocolate boxy. That's so insulting to the genius of Constable, because he wasn't good. He wasn't good at PR. You know, he needed somebody to speak on his behalf, like most artists do. He was totally opposite to Turner. Turner was rough. He was bullyish. Somebody described Turner as, this is verbatim, somebody described Turner as a fart through a trumpet. In other words, you know, he was quite uncouth, and yet he was trying to be cultured. Constable was very different. Constable, great family man, dedicated to his wife and his children. Turner didn't have a wife, but he had 2 children. So there's the difference. But his sketches are what we tend to like nowadays, because nowadays we're not afraid to show our feelings more. At the time, Constable wouldn't have shown these. These were for his own personal use. That's a surprise, isn't it, for Constable? Now, towards the end of his life, very lonely, very melancholic, very depressed, very tired, he also, unfortunately, suffered with rheumatism. And he became quite disabled down to his left side, his shoulder and his arm. And he also had a dislodged knee. So painting and walking around Hampstead became very difficult. And having leeches stuck to his skin to help with the blood condition meant it quite difficult, you know, to walk around and paint. This is the last painting that he painted in Hampstead Heath. It's called Hampstead Heath with a Rainbow. Now, this is of Branch Hill Pond. Can you see the windmill there in the middle? That windmill never existed where he painted it. So that's picture making, okay? That windmill never existed where he painted it. And can you see the rainbow, or the double rainbow rising from above it? And it goes off into somewhere behind the black curtain. The reason being very influenced by Rubens, for example, very interested by the Dutch Golden Age, very interested by painting en plein air, which, of course, the Dutch started first. I know the French like to say they were the first to paint en plein air with their Impressionism, but it's not true. So the Dutch, and from a practical point of view, it was because the Dutch landscape is flat that the easel wouldn't fall over. So this painting here of Branch Hill Pond, with that windmill that didn't exist there, can you see the donkeys here? I'm sure a lot of you, like me, will remember the donkey rides going around Whitestone Pond in the 1960s. What we have to remember is it's not just painting, it's feeling. And as the founder of modern landscape, Inspired, as I say, by the Dutch Golden Age, he went on to influence the French Barbizon school, the Realist school, the Romantic school, the Impressionists. When Monet came over here to escape the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, he saw Constable paintings. What about Mondrian as well? We know that Mondrian lived in Belsize Park and was a great lover of landscape. He started off as a landscapist, didn't he, Mondrian, before he created his grid images. I want to show you something that's hidden in here, but before I do, I just want to read you this. So to Constable, the landscape was symbolic for life. He said, "Imagine I have a dish of gold with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, chains, rings, brooches of gold in it. And then on the other side, I have a wooden container which contains shellfish, stones, and earth. Which one are you going to choose?" Well, obviously, the people would go for the gold dish. But he says, I tricked you. The gold dish is nothing but copper gilt. I can scrape off the gold with my finger. The diamonds are rubbish, they're paste. The rubies and the emeralds are nothing but glass. The chains and the rings aren't real gold, they're all counterfeit. Whereas, he said, the wooden dish with the shellfish, those shellfish are pearls. The stones are semi-precious stones, and mixed in with the clumps of earth are the ores of precious metal. Now, if you think about it, to survive, if I had 2 wooden sticks, I could make myself a fire. Yeah? I can find, if I've got one of those V ones, I can find water. If I've got some slate, I can shape it to make a weapon. I can eat berries. I can take clay out of the ground to mold it into a pot, and I can cook the berries that have grown. So it's nature that's more valuable than all this fake paste jewellery. There's a lovely story that he said people would come and talk to me when I'm working. And as I say, he was a very private man and didn't like to talk much. So sometimes you would find it annoying. But he said a woman came up to me and said, "Mr. Constable, I've seen those clouds that you paint." And he said, "Madam, they are not my clouds. They were here long before I started painting them." Now, this is really important. I don't know if this has got like a little beam. Is there anybody up there? Has this got a beam that I can shine, a red laser?
Maybe, I'm not sure it works, but it's like above the arrows, potentially.
Oh yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Thanks. Right, can you see that? See it? Okay. That, I've blown it up big, so it's a bit blurry because it's so small, but that's John Constable painting at his easel. I'll show you again. Oop. Yeah? So the landscape really is a self-portrait. If you're interested in finding out more, I was privileged to talk on Great Paintings of the World on Channel 5 with Andrew Marr about the Haywain. You can watch it on Catch Up. And I do a Walk Constable's Hampstead tour, which takes you around the properties that he lived in. I show you the images. We stand where he stood. We breathe the same air that he breathed, a bit more polluted nowadays. And we go back 250 years to his time because I take you through the little nooks and crannies. And so far, I'm glad to say that even when I've had local people joining me, so far I'm glad to say I've had 100% success even with the locals who say, I never knew this little alleyway or this little walkway existed. Has anybody got any questions? No? Oh, yes.
You've spoken about his illness and how that affected him. Didn't he have TB or something?
His wife had TB. His wife died of TB when she was 41. He died, he'd been painting in his studio in central London, so he still kept the family home in Well Walk. He was painting in his studio in central London, and he was there with one of his children, his son, and he complained that he felt a little bit unwell. So he went to bed. He was complaining of a bit of a pain, like indigestion. And he woke up, and he was still not any better. And it wasn't indigestion, he'd had a heart attack. And we know that he is buried in the church in Church Row. That's probably St. John's Church, Parish Church, is probably the oldest church in Hampstead. The records go back to 1312. As we see it now, it was rebuilt like that in 1747. And he's buried there in the family tomb with Maria and some of his children. So landscape wasn't just landscape to him, it was self-portraits as well. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to ask.
If he didn't sell many paintings, how did he live?
Okay, so when his father passed away, he was one of 6 children, and he inherited part of the family estate. And then his wife's family were very well-to-do. His father, Constable's father-in-law, was a solicitor to the royal family. And when his wife's father passed away, the father had left the Constable family £20,000, which was a lot of money then. And also, he was employed as a visiting tutor at the Royal Academy, having gone through the school, even though everybody didn't really, it wasn't fashionable to paint or light landscapes. But having gone through the Royal Academy school, he had to be given a part-time job there, because otherwise it makes the Royal Academy look a little bit duff. So he was also a teacher, but they put him in, he was teaching life drawing. But he was financially secure because of his family and his in-laws. And he did sell about 20 paintings here, and more in France. But he just didn't like the French. And also, he never would leave this country. The furthest he went, so if we're talking Suffolk, Essex, London, the furthest north he went was the Lake District. And that didn't help much to promote him. He didn't want to travel abroad. But let me just tell you this, because I make him sound like a miserable sod, and he wasn't. He had a very unusual, witty sense of humour. And there's a lovely story where he left a note for his milkman, and he said to the milkman, "Dear milkman, next time you deliver, can you please make sure that you leave the milk and the water in separate containers?" In other words, he was saying, look, you're watering down my milk. So he was funny like that, but he kept himself to himself. But here in Hampstead, he said, let me take my everlasting rest. And he did. And I think he would have been honoured. I mean, it's been a long time coming. You know, sometimes they say it takes a lifetime to become an overnight success, but he would have been honoured that we're talking about him and you're reinstating the pond. Yes.
I was just going to say that final one you showed with the rainbow, that painting is on view in the Royal Academy in the exhibition that ends next Sunday, the 13th.
Yes.
That's actually on view.
Yes. And this is the last painting he did of Hampstead. not the last painting he did. When he died of a heart attack, there was another painting in his studio, but the last painting he did of Hampstead was this one. And as I say, it's all invented. But how lovely to see him there in his own painting at his easel, with that touch of red, because of course red is the complementary colour to green. And you know who thought he was brilliant? Lucian Freud, which may surprise you a little bit, but if you think about it, Constable said, "My mistress is the landscape. Ladies are trees. Trees are ladies." And whilst he's treating the landscape as though it's a portrait, Lucian Freud treats the portrait or the figure as though it's a curvaceous landscape. So I find that interesting too.